Welcome to LGP's podcast. I'm Bill Pickett. I'm a trial attorney here in Yakima, Washington, and I've been doing this for 27 years. Over that time, I've seen a whole host of scenarios and situations where people have been catastrophically injured. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about some of the examples that I've seen with this one hope in mind, that in the future, having heard about some of the things I've experienced, some of the cases that we've worked on, that you will be able to take that history and you will be able to be, as you move forward, learn some tips about how to hopefully avoid some of the losses that we've had to walk with people and walk through with people over the last 27 years. Some of the material that we're going to discuss today is really difficult to hear, so here's a little bit of a warning. Injuries, and especially catastrophic injury and loss of life, is difficult to talk about. It's also difficult to hear about. And some of the information we're going to talk about today will be distressing. So we want to give you that warning. And if you are someone who does not want to hear what we have to say on this topic, please feel free. Turn off the podcast and focus your attention somewhere else. For those of you who are interested and who want to learn a little bit about hopefully how you might avoid some of these losses, please stay tuned and we'll get to it. So what are some of the cases that I've worked on over the years that sort of stand out and really say, man, I wish people had known about this or that particular thing before this tragedy occurred, right? And perhaps it would have helped to avoid it, right? The worst ones, hands down, ones are injuries to kids, right? And I've seen just a really kind of a slew of them, some that stand out, drownings, right? And drownings to kids where if sort of the preventable scenario, if more attention had been paid to the child, that would have, for sure, it's not even a maybe, prevented the drowning. Without casting stones or criticism, inattention is a part of human life, right? We all have our focus distracted, and it's becoming, I think, probably even more prevalent in today's world where we have so many things grabbing our attention. So inattention plays a big part, and what I would say to folks, especially with injuries to kids, and the example that I just gave was a drowning, is that when we're supervising or we're taking care of little ones, smaller people, younger people, inexperienced people, we really need to remember to keep our focus and our attention on what we're doing with them and what they're doing so that we can avoid catastrophic loss, whether it be, you see a lot of this, I can remember this one too, parking lots. Right? What's a parking lot? It's just a place where you park your car, but it's also parents with little ones. Man, oh man, you need to be on high alert. Especially if you have children like my children, right? Which were called, they were renowned for their running, right? So some kids just love to run. And so I know for my wife and I, when we parked our car and got our kids out of the car and they were little people and they would try to run or do whatever, we always had to have a hand on them. And it's that being attentive to where you are at that moment oftentimes is the key to preventing tragedy or catastrophic loss. It's that thing called attention. It does not mean, please don't hear this as saying you have to be hyper vigilant at all times. I kind of became that a little bit of a parent. And I think partly from dealing with so much trauma and loss in my professional life and representing people in those situations, that I became a little hyper vigilant. My children would tell you that I see danger, at every corner, even when there isn't any. And that's probably a hazard of being in the injury world where you're seeing so much of where things have gone wrong. Very little of all the times, despite the fact you see where things go right a lot too, but you see what goes wrong with a child through inattention, and you only have to see that once, and you'll never forget it. Here's the child scenario in a parking lot, right? Child comes to the car with a parent. The parent opens the door. Child starts to get in the car. Parent's distracted. They end up opening their own door, not realizing child doesn't get in the car, but child races out into the parking lot. And the only thing the parent then hears next is a horrific sound of their child being run over. And they look, and there is their child under the tires of a huge vehicle. And the parent's worst nightmare is playing out in front of them in real time, and it's as if it's not real, but it is. And they're pounding on they find themselves trying to shatter the window of the driver who's now parked on top of their child, and screaming and losing their mind because they know one thing for sure is they've got to get to their child, and that vehicle that weighs thousands of pounds is literally crushing them to death. And the driver then panics, doesn't really understand what's happening, and backs the car over the child again. That's something that people never forget. Death of a child is one of the most difficult kinds of cases to deal with. One, because the loss itself, it's really the sacred being torn from somebody's life, right? And then they survive, but their child doesn't. That's a horrific scenario. The other thing is for the folks who were actually involved in whatever inattention led to the death, the blaming, the sense of having caused such drastic harm to another is catastrophic. I've taken a number of depositions of folks who have caused harm, and it's incredibly painful and oftentimes incredibly distressing emotionally and spiritually, physically, to those people who have caused that loss, to actually realize that the life of another was lost through their action, right? So being sensitive to that as you help families try to move forward and heal from a catastrophic loss like this, those are things you never forget. Another example, right? You talk about injuries and sort of ahas and how could you have prevented them. Talk a lot about burns, right? One of the worst, if there are the death claims, right, where people, their life is ended. Those are in a category of loss that's extremely difficult to navigate. Again, spiritually, physically, emotionally, all of it draining. And not the lawyers feel it also, certainly not to the degree that those who have suffered the loss feel it, but it's a part of knowing who your clients are where that sort of comes on you as well. Another area is where people survive, okay? These are cases where people are not killed. They are horrifically injured, and they live. And some of the worst scenarios there would be the cases of burns, right? Represented people with static spark explosions Okay, and people say, well, what do you mean static spark? Well, static, anytime you walk across carpet and then, your kid, you touch fingers with a sibling or a friend and you have a little spark there, that's static. That's static electricity. And our bodies can create it in just living in the world. If you look at a little known fact, when you fill up your car, next time you fill up your car with gas, actually read some of the warnings that are on the gas pumps. Okay, and you will see, believe it or not, most pumps have a warning that says, be cautious and aware of static spark, because the vapors emitting from the fuel as you're putting it in your car, if you were to spark those vapors, whether it be metal rubbing together or static electricity coming off of a person's body into the vapors, can ignite those vapors and cause a massive explosion, which in turn, flesh and skin doesn't do well around explosive material and flame, and cause just horrific burns, right? And the various degrees of burns, right? First, second, third degree of burns. And of course, the deeper the burns, the more layers of the skin that the fire and the burn has gone through, and the more catastrophic it is on the person, because of the disfigurement is horrible, but two, initially the pain and the shock that's caused by flesh burning deeply on the human body is horrible, absolutely horrible. And I've represented people who have literally been through static spark, right? A spark igniting vapors, instantaneously burned to horrific degrees that quickly. And I remember the first time I watched, and I actually was able to see a video of a client who was burned horrifically. About 55% of their body was burned, third, fourth degree burns. It happened through static spark. A little bit of static electricity popped off in the air, ignited vapors, which then engulfed the client. And I was shocked at the speed in which it happened. You almost kind of think, look, in your mind, you go, look, there's a fire. Be careful. It's coming this way. We could get burned. And then here it is. It was nothing like that. It was static spark. And in fact, you could even see it was like a little blip of light, and then a massive fireball igniting around the client and severely burning them. That's how quickly it happened. So what's the rule on that scenario? The rule is this: when dealing with vapors, gasoline, or any kind of a mixture that presents any kind of a toxic vapor into the atmosphere around you, no cell phones. That's the big one. Cell phones. How many people get out of the car and they pull up to the gas pump and they're, hey, I'm getting some gas. I'll be home in a little. That cell phone can cause a static spark, which can ignite a vapor and actually burn you. And it's why, if you look the next time you go, read the warnings around the gas pumps. You'll see no cell phone usage, caution, static spark, anything like that. Not every gas pump will have that, but a lot of them have those warnings, and which most of us don't read. So when you're fueling your car, that's the most common scenario, right? Don't use your cell phone. Certainly, you'll see the warnings that say don't smoke cigarettes. That seems to be a no-brainer, but I still see people smoking cigarettes while they're fueling their cars. And don't do things that could cause a static spark. Fuel it the way they tell you to fuel it. 99.9% of the time, you'll be safe, and you'll get your gasoline and drive on into your future. But those are a couple different scenarios. Another one that's really common, summertime. Summertime, people are active, super active. Boating, right? Boating scenarios where people are injured. Quite common, and primarily it's people on a boat, put people on a boat, and their enjoyment factor goes really high because it's fun. But the danger factor and the inattentive factor and the not being aware factor somehow drops. And I don't know if it's disproportionate because fun is the focus and safety is not. But boating accidents are huge, often catastrophic or life-altering. The one that I remember a scenario where we had a family member being towed. People towed on big, what do you call them? Big rings, floaties, right? Inner tubes. And they're being towed. And the family in the boat thought it would be a great idea to pull the rope and let it go while the boat's, racing across the lake. And it pops the rope, and the inner tube jumps, and everybody has a great time. Unfortunately, that process took the carabiner that hooked the floaty, the inner tube, to the rope, the tow rope, and it stretched it open, and turned it into really what was like a fish hook. And so as they pull the rope and they let it go and pop, and everybody's having fun, that little carabiner gets stretched from the force. It becomes an actual fish hook, and then there's a pull on the rope. It comes out of the connection to the inner tube, the floaty, and wraps around the leg of the person who's being towed. And of course, they've hooked them into their hamstring, right? And the boat's not going to stop at that point, but the fun is, as the back portion of the person's leg was ripped, horribly ripped. I was going to say off, but it was ripped in a huge, terrible way. Of course, you can imagine what results from that is massive screaming, people panicking, a lot of blood in the water, and then a scenario where everybody's wondering what happened. Again, the prevention of that is have fun, but maybe don't take it to the next level of fun where we've come up with a really creative way to tow people in the boat. Let's pull the line and then let it pop, right? But those are things that get forgotten, and it's one of the reasons that lawyers come back and we have to sort of reconstruct what happened. And more importantly, how do you avoid it in the future? Well, the solution sometimes is really simple in hindsight, but it's oftentimes really painful to get to that solution after the fact, but hopefully helpful to people who are boating. Boating is about having fun. It's about having great family times, super good memories, and being safe. So whatever you do, whatever activity you engage in, absolutely have fun, enjoy those moments that are so special with family and friends, and also remember to stay vigilant, focused, reasonable, and avoid those things that could cause people to be injured and to be harmed, sometimes catastrophically. So that's the word for the day. Have fun and be aware.